Hello, everybody. My name is Luke Menzel, CEO of the Energy Efficiency Council. On behalf of our partners, the Property Council of Australia, the Green Building Council of Australia, the Australian Sustainable Built Environment Council and the EEC, it's my great pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar on smart energy management in government operations. It's also my great pleasure to let you know that I'm coming to you today from the land of the Gadigal of the Eora Nation up here in Sydney. I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and indeed any and all Aboriginal people that are tuning in to this session today. Can I say it's great to be up from Melbourne and getting out and about at the end of what has been a pretty choppy year. I also want to thank our friends at the GBCA who are hosting me here for this webinar at their beautiful offices in Tower 2 at Barangaroo. So I want to note that today is all about an important new resource that we pulled together with the Property Council, the GBCA and ASBEC, Smart Energy Management in Government Operations. And it's really about setting out best practice principles for how governments can take a whole of government approach, bringing all government departments along for a journey to both strengthen budgets and, importantly, in this era of net zero commitments and governments leading by example, of course, slashing emissions. However, I want to make it clear at the outset, this is an industry giving government a to-do list. This is really about us collating and codifying some of the best practice principles that leading governments around the country are already implementing. So, you know, whether it's a whole of government approach, centralised facilitation, a financing mechanism that incorporates loans and repayments from savings. This is tried and tested stuff, but it has never been pulled together in a template format before. And our goal with bringing it together is to do two things. Obviously, there's always more to do, and we want to inspire those governments that are leading to do even more as we work our way through this critical decade. But importantly, for those governments that don't have whole of government programs in place, we want to make it as easy for them as possible to learn from those that have been in the game for a little bit longer and get those programs for smart energy management in place. So I'm delighted to say that we released this new report just a few minutes ago. You can access it. I'm sure there'll be a link in the chat, but you can access it at ec.org.au/government-operations. I encourage you to read it. Some fantastic beach reading for you over the summer if you're so inclined, and if you're tuning into this webinar, you may well be. Today we're going to be covering some of the key themes to give you a little bit of a flavour and hopefully get you excited about what can be achieved in this space if governments put their mind to the task. So I'll give you a brief overview of today's session. In a moment, we'll hear from the Victorian Assistant Treasurer who is helping us launch the guide today, and we're incredibly appreciative for that. We'll then be hearing from 4 leading public servants that really have the runs on the board in terms of implementing these sorts of, transformative energy and performance improvements, either at the whole of government level, at the portfolio level, or even at the site level for particular institutions. Now, I know we have a lot of government representatives that are tuning in live today, and there's an awful lot more that have expressed an interest in catching up with this webinar over the coming weeks. So if you do have questions as we work through, I'd encourage them to drop them in the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. We'll be taking a few questions immediately following the Assistant Treasurer's remarks, and then we'll be having an extended Q&A right at the end of the session after we've heard from our fantastic panelists. So a couple of opportunities for you to put your question, and I'll promise I'll get to as many of them as we possibly can. So we're going to start with the 50,000 foot view, the whole of government view, and we want to spend a little bit of time reflecting on the trailblazing effort that the Victorian government has made with the Greener Government Buildings program. Of course, founded in 2009 and really leading the charge in terms of driving energy efficiency and renewable energy projects right across the Victorian government, which is why we're so delighted to have Victoria's Assistant Treasurer, the Minister with portfolio responsibility for the GGB, its current custodian, the Honourable Danny Pearson MP, who is, as I said, the Assistant Treasurer, but he's also Minister for Government Services, Minister for Regulatory Reform and Minister for Creative Industries. Assistant Treasurer, I'm not sure if you're in a position to have your video turned on or indeed turn it on yourself, but now would be a great time to do so. And the question I have for you while we're sorting that out is, of those 4 portfolios, which is the fun one? I've got a guess, but I was keen to get your guidance on that.
I think you can hear me. I'm having trouble starting my video, but look, as a father of 5 children, I think I have a similar relationship with my children as to my portfolios. I love them all equally.
Okay, very diplomatic answer there, Assistant Treasurer. I'm sort of inclined, I don't know if we want to have a little play around with the video, or whether we should just forge ahead. I know that there'll be many people sort of listening as we're going, rather than watching on their videos anyway. Assistant Treasurer, why don't we just forge ahead, and we'll see if anyone in the background can turn your video on as we go along. I understand you have some brief remarks before we get into questions.
Yes, I do. Thanks, Luke. And look, at the outset, thank you so very much for having me today. And I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are individually meeting. And I pay my respects to the elders past and present, and the Aboriginal elders of other communities who may be with us today. And look, as I said, it is so great to be able to be with you all today. Look, the last couple of years, no doubt, have been particularly challenging in Victoria, as they have right across the country. And I'm sure they've left their mark on every single one of us. We know the toll that the pandemic and the necessary health restrictions have taken on our community, both on a personal as well as a business level. And our utmost priority from the start of the pandemic has been to bring our people through it. And we've sought to do that because we wanted to save lives as well as protect our economy. So we've emerged from this last lockdown with something we've never had before. We've got a community that is not just highly vaccinated at more than 90%. It's one of the most highly vaccinated in the entire world. And with that powerful protection, as well as our own economic credentials, we are here at this time incredibly confident about our future as we look towards 2022, because it certainly has been a very challenging and difficult time for the last 20 months. The energy efficiency and renewable energy industry is crucial to the success of our state. And that's why I'm proud to be here to support the launch of the Best Practice Guide for Energy Management in Government Operations. Now we know energy efficiency and renewable energy projects won't appear by themselves unless we make a conscious effort to drive them. Establishing clear policies and programs will make it easier for government agencies and departments to be part of energy efficiency and renewable energy projects. Now, the Victorian government has a strong commitment to developing clean energy and acting on climate change. Victoria was the first jurisdiction in Australia and one of the first in the world to declare a net zero emissions target by 2050. And in May of last year, we released the climate change strategy to support our economy to achieve this target. Now, as an established climate leader nationally and around the world, the strategy will accelerate our journey to a decarbonised future. Now, a key part of this strategy has been the Greener Government Buildings, which is a program that started back in 2009. Since then, Greener Government Buildings has funded $285 million in energy efficiency and renewable energy projects. Combined, these projects are estimated to achieve annual savings of $41 million and abate more than 180,000 tonnes of greenhouse gas emissions each and every year. So it really is a huge amount. Over the next decade or so, the Greener Government Buildings program will invest a further $200 million in energy efficiency and renewable projects. Now, we know that energy efficiency and renewable energy is an absolute win for Victorians. At this time of uncertainty, our ongoing investment in the program is a cost-effective way to support the state's economic recovery from the impacts of COVID-19. It supports jobs in the energy services sector, but at the same time, it tackles climate change, and you'd expect me to say this as the Assistant Treasurer, it also reduces government expenditure as well.
Have we lost the Assistant Treasurer? Seems like there might be some AV difficulties along with video difficulties with the Assistant Treasurer. I might get my team, Julianne and Tom, if you can see what you can do with the Minister's office to get those resolved, that would be amazing. But in the meantime, I might invite, oh, here we go. Hello. Now I can see you, Assistant Treasurer. I can't actually hear you. There we go.
There we go. Murphy's Law, as soon as I finish my speech, the camera works. So yes. There you have it.
We didn't hear that. We didn't hear the crescendo of that address, Assistant Treasurer, but we definitely got the gist of it. And I can hear that you're incredibly proud of the role that the GGB is playing, both in terms of strengthening Victoria's budget, but importantly also meeting some of those near-term commitments. It's an important point because Victoria, not every jurisdiction around the country has those near-term targets, and they certainly don't have them legislated in the way they are in Victoria for 2025 and for 2030. How does that sort of framework sort of focus the mind around the cabinet table in terms of what government should be doing in its own operations?
Oh, well, look, I think the wonderful thing about targets, you know, they work, and you work towards them, and you set your policy settings accordingly to make sure that they can be achieved and reached. And you know, if they're legislated, you know, they become LAW law. You've got to fulfil those functions. So that's something I think that has been, you know, incredibly important for us as a government. And I think it also too, it helps us try to challenge these, confront these challenges head on in a very deliberative, systematic way. I think sometimes people can get a bit frightened about where do we start in terms of tackling climate change. But I do think there's a real benefit by starting this process now and embracing it and really trying to target it by having these targets and working accordingly.
Yeah, and look, I think there'd be many folk that are interested in action in this space that would say that getting some of those quick wins that can be delivered, particularly by energy efficiency, but also through the transition to renewables and demand management, just makes the task that much easier later on, right?
Correct. Yeah, absolutely.
So at this point, I note, Assistant Treasurer, your office arranged for one of your trusted advisors within the department, Sam Burke, Director of Land and Property at DTF, to join us in case there were any particularly curly questions we threw at you over the course of today's session. Sam, I don't know if you want to turn your video and your audio on at this point, because it's possible that you might want to field this question. Hello, Sam.
G'day, Luke. Hi, everyone.
Great to have you with us, and happy for either you, Assistant Treasurer, or indeed you, Sam, to address this. There's interest from some of the broader sector in since the renewed commitment to GGB in the 2020 budget, that decade-long sort of horizon for projects. Sort of what has been some of the big recent projects that have got up and running, and what does the pipeline look like in terms of some of the things that the government is going to be trying to hit off over the next couple of years?
Well, I might throw to Sam for some of the specifics, but I think, look, from my perspective in that broader macro settings, providing that level of horizon and that certainty of funding, I think it really sends a clear signal to the owners of these assets that, here's a funding stream available that is actually you're going to be able to access, that you can start to prioritise your projects. It gives people that level of confidence and certainty that there's that funding available for them to start embarking upon, introducing, cutting edge technology to significantly reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. So that's something that I was certainly very proud of as a government that we're able to do. Because it sends a really clear signal that we're not going away, we're not vacating the field, we are taking this head on, and we're tackling this head on, and we're providing that level of certainty of funding going forward. But Sam, if you've got any specific examples, I might throw to you now.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Minister. So, yeah, we've been pretty consistent over the years in rolling out projects. You'll probably hear a bit more about the National Gallery Victoria's EPC, Energy Performance Contracting project in a little while from Lucy Haswell, and also from Tiernan about all the projects going on in the health sector in Victoria. So in addition to those projects, we've got a $3 million energy performance contract, which is being implementation just starting at Box Hill Institute and TAFE, which is a good and a long time coming, but eventually we've got there with that project. Solar and lighting projects across a number of different public transport facilities, metro trains and bus depots and the like. There's also a schools project going on at the moment. We've got a lot of schools to get through, and we're probably still battling with the first couple of hundred, but there's about 1,500 schools in Victoria, and we're slowly rolling our way out across the school portfolio with solar initially, and we'll be looking at lighting as well. There's a nice, interesting project as well at the Epping market, Melbourne Market, wholesale fruit, veg and flower market, which is a big solar canopy, a $6.5 million solar canopy, which is also going to provide a lot of shade for the cars underneath. So it'll be a solar canopy generating electricity for the market, but also shading the vehicles so they don't get super hot. So serving a couple of purposes there. So it's $15 million of additional funding's been approved since the start of this year. So lots going on at the moment. As I said, pretty consistent with previous years, but we're continuing to find new projects and roll them out.
And we sort of covered this when the program was announced, that 20 million funding bucket. But the idea, just for everybody around the country that's perhaps not as familiar with the Greener Government Buildings program as we are, the idea is to reap the savings and reinvest that over the next decade. Is that right?
Yeah, look, that's absolutely right, and that's the beauty of the system, because it enables that level of cheap financing, and it becomes self-fulfilling. So, I think if you look at this program, we're going to improve more than 600 government buildings. It's going to create jobs, so 100 positions initially, and then up to 200 in future years. There really is a simplicity and a beauty about the fact that we're making these sorts of investments, and it will just start to make sure that, as the projects are commissioned, the annual savings, repay the loan, and it just goes back into that fund. So, it really is there's a beauty in its simplicity, but it's playing a really vitally important role in giving departments and agencies the confidence to be able to start to think about making their assets more more green, more environmentally friendly, but it's giving them the tools to be able to actually affect that change, which is really important. And I think it's what, certainly I think in my discussions with the VPS, it's what the VPS wants. You know, they want to work in an organisation that takes these matters very seriously.
Yep. Well, we're almost out of time, Assistant Treasurer, but there's one last question which we were going to pose to you, which is sort of thinking about the national context. Of course, New South Wales has a very similar program which is reaping similar benefits, but there's plenty of other states around the country that are yet to implement sort of a program sort of following the best practice principles. There are examples of more targeted efforts, but not the sort of same whole of government framework and reinvestment of savings, which, you know, we found is the best practice around the nation and indeed around the world. What would your message be to some of those other jurisdictions that are sort of considering how they do their bit in the journey to net zero emissions?
Oh, look, sometimes with this stuff, it's more about just sharing knowledge and collaborating together. You know, I think if anything that we've learned in this pandemic is the importance of being nimble, being flexible, trying to collaborate, working together to get you know, the best possible outcome. Look, certainly from my perspective, as the responsible minister, I would welcome the opportunity of talking with you know, colleagues around the country about the strengths and the applicability of this program. I'm certainly very happy to facilitate any discussions at an officer-to-officer level with Sam and his team at DTF. You know, sometimes it's often a case of just saying, well, here's something that we've done, here's something that's working for us. It might work for you, it might not. It might require tinkering around the edges, or it might require some you know, more wide-ranging changes. But what we think is being deployed in Victoria has worked well. It's gone extremely well these last 12 years. We think that's got some real value and benefits. You know, in the spirit of trying to tackle climate change head on, we are very happy to work with any other jurisdiction about this and to identify how these changes can be rolled out on a larger scale. Because the reality is with these things, you know, we're all in this together, and we all have to try and get through this. You know, it doesn't really make I mean, you can drive significant benefits in Victoria, but if the rest of the country is unable to achieve those benefits, we're still going to be all confronted with the challenges of climate change. So, you know, really keen to collaborate, really keen to share the lessons and the learnings we've acquired these last 12 years, because it's all about the higher purpose. And the higher purpose is tackling climate change head on to create a safer world.
Yeah, I completely agree, Assistant Treasurer. And while there might be, you know, adaptations that need to be made around the country, that's a sort of the spirit that we came to this project with as well, is to, you know, pull together those learnings from an industry perspective, the things that we've observed over the last decade that have really worked for New South Wales and indeed for Victoria as that initial leader, codify it, and then it becomes a basis to accelerate that knowledge sharing as much as anything else, and hopefully a basis for Sam to be, you know, having those conversations with jurisdictions right around the country. I'm sure you're looking forward to that in 2022, Sam.
That's right, Luke.
All right, well, Assistant Treasurer, you've been generous with your time. We really appreciate you joining us. Thank you for helping us launch the guide and the generous offer to work with other jurisdictions to share what Victoria's learned over the last 12 years, and we look forward to seeing Victoria continue to kick goals over the next decade with the continued success of the Greener Government Buildings Program. All right, so with that, Sam, I understand you can stick around and will be joining us for the panel discussion at the end of this session. So thank you for that. You can grab a cup of tea, mate, and we'll circle back to you in due course. But we are going to get to our panel discussion now. We've got some outstanding experts from around the country to talk all of you at home through some of their experiences when it comes to actually implementing energy performance upgrades, whether it's at the portfolio level or indeed at the site level. Again, I'm going to have a one-on-one chat with each of our panelists. We will have that Q&A session at the end, so please do drop your questions in the chat as we're working our way through. And as I said, I'll get to as many of them as I possibly can. But let's go to Parag. Parag, if you can pop your video on and turn your audio on, that would be fantastic. Parag Shinde is, of course, Group Energy and Sustainability manager at Property New South Wales, one of the largest managers and occupiers of office space in Australia. And I think, Greg, that's not just, you know, government, that's across all organisations across the country. So a very, very significant footprint you've got there. And indeed, one of the other many hats you wear is sitting on the Neighbours National Steering Committee, which I do too. So it's always wonderful to have your contributions and work with you as part of that forum. We're delighted to have you with us today. Welcome.
Thanks, Luke. Good to be here.
I thought it might be really helpful just to, as we get into this more detailed discussion, for you to just introduce Property New South Wales, just so we've got a little bit of the context. So our viewers, our listeners have a bit of a sense of what you're dealing with in terms of portfolio and putting some of the achievements that you've had in some sort of context.
Sure. Property New South Wales manages New South Wales government's office portfolio. So we have about 200 owned assets across the state, and they're spread across from Broken Hill to Albury to Tweed Head and everything in between. We also deliver on new build assets in partnership with private sector landlords. We are now going to the market and getting new assets built that we'll own for the future. We have a team of leased asset management people and owned asset management people within the asset management division. And we're also delivering large precincts. One of the examples is North Parramatta Precinct, which will be one of the largest precincts in New South Wales. So that's the broader remit. Just to give you a context of our assets, most of our owned assets are 50 years average age. They're spread across remote regions of New South Wales. We do not have on-site management teams like FMs and operations managers. And historically, there was very little oversight of what's happening at the ground level on those assets. We also manage one of the largest portfolios of green leased assets. So New South Wales government has a 10-page green lease schedule, which covers lots of resource efficiency and energy efficiency measures, including neighbours and Green Star. And we actively manage those forums between the tenants and landlords, delivering some substantial outcomes on the large leased asset portfolio. We also track and report back to government on how those are tracking. And it's a combined effort, so there's obligations on both tenants and landlords. It's not just one-way street. So that's in summary what we deliver for the government. And there's about 140 agencies that we support.
Thank you for that context. It's really important just to sort of highlight the scale of what you're dealing with. And it puts what you've achieved into stark relief. They're quite incredible figures I've been provided with here. I understand that you have achieved a 54% reduction in electricity consumption across your sites in FY 2022 compared to FY 2014 to 15. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And how has that been achieved? Like so I guess two things, like how have you driven that right across the portfolio, and where have some of the big wins been in terms of that incredible reduction in electricity use?
Sure. So 6 years ago when I started with Property New South Wales, just to give you some context, we did not even know how many invoices we paid. So first activity was, it was a lot of manual process. So we implemented a robotic bill automation system that validates and pays the bills. And that itself saved us 500K a year, just on on-time payment and loss of, say, discounts. Once we knew what our baseline was from a utility perspective, we have implemented fault detection and analytics platforms. So we focused on that. We had monthly meetings with the FM teams and optimized our assets substantially over the 1 to 2 years timeframe. That sort of activity gave us about 20-25% reduction on total energy. And once we fine-tuned the assets, set up the benchmarks, like we started doing neighbors ratings on the portfolio and set up a baseline for that. So we knew like what the strategy should be in terms of implementing ECMs and initiatives going forward. So in the last 3.5 years, we have focused on a substantial amount of investment in efficiency capital investment. So projects like rooftop solar systems, whole building LED lighting upgrades. So we don't do base building ratings, or nor we do base building upgrades. We do whole building upgrades in everything because tenants are government as well. We have also transitioned to smart building IoT systems, which monitor IQ metrics, utility metrics, and also occupant comfort metrics. And we can dispatch sort of control systems to action some things on site remotely pretty quick. We have also invested in a smart battery technology. So we are currently in the process of rolling out smart batteries with a full virtual power plant capability across the portfolio. So that's sort of preempting the electric vehicles coming into the mix.
Right.
And once we have V2X, those three asset classes like the solar, the batteries, and the V2X vehicles will form a nexus to deliver revenue streams, carbon reduction, and total efficiency for the asset.
That's an incredible story of transformation over the course of 6 years. I know that the New South Wales government effectively, and I'm simplifying somewhat, but the closest analogue for the Greener Government Buildings program that I've been talking about with the Assistant Treasurer and with Sam is the Government Resource Efficiency Policy, and specifically measure E1 under that policy. Do you want to talk about how that program has influenced or helped drive or given license to some of the work that you've been doing at Property New South Wales?
So the Government Resource Efficiency Policy came into existence in 2014, and it had different benchmarks back then, but the structure is the same, as you alluded to, E1, which is the energy efficiency or energy reduction target, which currently sits at 10%. So that obviously the policy gives us a good fundamental framework across government to focus on key areas that not just save resources, but also save money for the taxpayers and create jobs.
Yep.
So the E1 target is the first target, and that's why it's the most important. And energy, as you know, the electricity cost is the highest. So even if you think of business and commercial aspects, we have looked at water efficiency measures and done a lot of projects there. We have looked at waste, but in comparison to electricity and energy, they don't stack up as much financially. So that's why we focus on that. But it actually has given us backing as well when influencing our businesses and government to do stuff. There was a new iteration in 2019. So the work we did from 2015 on to 2019, we took all those learnings and also contributed in the policy formation for the new policy. And some of the new things we have uplifted the neighbors targets in 2019. There was clear targets set on some of the resource efficiency measures. But the other thing we have introduced is the Green Star tool as well as a target. So there's all three Green Star tools in the policy, from design as built, interiors, and performance. And we actually took a lead by example approach to that. So all our new build assets require Green Star, design as built, and interiors 5-star.
Yep.
As well as we have actually been the first government portfolio in Australia for offices and a whole building operations level to achieve 5-star Green Star performance over 22 assets that we own. And we also then stepped up to get carbon neutral certification on those assets. So again, like in the new iteration, which the policy I think is currently in progress, might be released sometime in 2022.
Yep.
Some of these learnings from us and other agencies will contribute towards uplifting the targets and setting up a net zero strategy.
And it's a really important points you're making there, and I'm sort of like, it's almost like the nesting dolls of sort of mechanisms that you can use to drive that change on the ground, and how it almost becomes a self-sustaining process in the end. So you've sort of got this broader government framework, like the Resource Efficiency Policy or GGB, that drives departments and portfolio managers to start gaining experience. It gives them the license to do that, utilising sort of available sort of benchmarking tools, whether it's Neighbours or Green Star, to still get that granular understanding of what's going on across a set of assets, and then that can be fed into future policy making as you understand what the benefits are and what can be achieved. And as I say, it's because, is it fair to say, Parag, it becomes a virtuous circle from that perspective? Yeah, and because we have the results to show, and we have like implemented substantial detailed metering across the portfolio, so everything is measured and verified on a 30-minute interval basis. So we can provide, every time we do 10-year and annual budgets, all that information and accurate information feeds into those budgets of what the expected outcomes would be. So for example, in the last 5 years, our electricity or total utility expenditure has dropped by 50%. On bill and also tracking on the meter. We have also had return on investments, which are substantial. So the solar and lighting projects have given us 30% return on investment, which is pretty good in a sort of situation where you have 2% interest in the bank. Yep. So I guess, and once you implement these things, they're guaranteed. They're not like the share market. They're not like the housing market, which goes up and down. It will at least give you those returns for 10 years. So those sort of things are making like strides in the government, and government is recognizing that these things are not just
an environmental outcome, but they create jobs, they have revenue streams, and they save money for the state.
I'm going to move on to our next panelist at the moment. We have had one clarifying question in the chat, and we mentioned that figure of 54% reduction in electricity consumption over the last 5 or 6 years. Is that for Property New South Wales, or is that for the?
Yes, it is for Property New South Wales office portfolio that is owned, and it's for whole building operations.
Yeah, no, that's good to understand. And do you have a sense of the broader performance of New South Wales government assets?
The New South Wales government broader performance is managed by the whole of government sustainable government team.
Yep.
So we all report annually on the GREP policy, so we just submitted our annual GREP report. Yep. Similarly, all agencies do the same. So I think in the next 3-4 months, there'll be a report that will be published which shows overall government performance.
Fantastic. Well, we'll look forward to that. That was a question without notice. So thanks for taking that on. Parag, we'll let you now go grab a cuppa, and I'm delighted to welcome Tiernan Humphreys to the panel. Hello, Tiernan. Tiernan, of course, is Manager for Environmental Sustainability at the Victorian Health Building Authority, and of course you have over 20 years of sustainability experience, and you have a team which is responsible for integrating sustainability and climate change into Victoria's $9 billion health capital program, managing, I understand, Tiernan, around 70 million of energy efficiency and solar projects. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you, Luke. Great to be here.
So Tiernan, as I do with Parag, I wonder whether, I gave a little bit of context about the scale of the operation there that is the Victorian hospital system. Do you want to just flesh out a little bit in terms of the scope of what you and your team deal with in terms of energy and sustainability issues?
Yeah, sure. So the Victorian Health Building Authority is a delivery agency within the Department of Health that basically is responsible for everything from the business case through to delivery of public hospital capital projects across Victoria. And these can range from the new $1 billion new Frankston Hospital to fairly small infrastructure upgrades. I was talking this morning to someone about EVs in an early parenting centre in Bendigo. So the scale of the portfolio is quite large. I was walking around the Royal Melbourne Hospital boiler house yesterday, so there is a huge variety and a huge scope. We've got around 140 hospitals with acute inpatients. Then we also have mental health, aged care, community health, ambulance stations. So it is a fairly large and varied portfolio.
I understand consuming around 5,000 terajoules of energy a year and emitting 900,000 tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent. So in terms of the Assistant Treasurer's sort of, explication of the Victorian government's emissions reduction commitments, it almost doesn't get bigger than the hospital system, right, in terms of driving that change.
Not really, but in this instance, being the biggest isn't always the best, and we are doing as much as we can to reduce that carbon footprint.
And what are some of the key ways? And I know this is a journey that because of that's supported by the Green Government Buildings Program. It's a journey that Victoria's been on for some time. What have been some of the key levers that you've been pulling to drive that change? It's almost, I imagine, just with a system that large and with, let's be frank, energy is an input into delivering a core service, which is the priority of the Victorian government, delivering a quality hospital system. Like it must be like turning a super tanker in some senses, Tiernan, over time. But I know it's been something you've been working on for some time. So what are the key things that have helped you to get some runs on the board?
I think the size of our energy bill is probably one. So we spend around 145 million a year on energy. Majority of that, over 110 million, is on electricity, and then a fair chunk on gas. So when I started in this role 10 years ago, I think gas was around $3 to $4 a gigajoule. It's now around 10 to 12.
Yep.
So that is making energy costs much more visible to management. So it is something where they can begin to see savings. But on the plus side, higher costs does improve the business case for energy efficiency. So there are things I can do now that I couldn't do 10 years ago because there wasn't that return on investment. The assistant treasurer spoke a lot this morning about the net zero commitment and climate change. So that is a key driver, and the health system will be one of those sectors most impacted by climate change. And indeed, our health system is being impacted by climate change right now. And the healthcare workers are perhaps one of the most educated about climate change. And they are really, they have really high expectations on what the health system will do to respond to climate change, and they want to play their part. So there is a lot of drive from the health care workers, and we do employ 80,000 people across Victoria, so that is quite a large voice.
Yeah, I suppose that buy-in from the staff on the ground makes it easier to drive these projects because you've got a receptive audience. Just in terms of the hospital system itself, and there's differences between hospitals and schools and office buildings and you know, cultural institutions, which we'll hear about at the moment. What are the big licks of opportunity in the hospital system that you've I guess been able to historically unlock, and perhaps are continuing to do so as you move through the portfolio? And what are some of the emerging areas that are becoming more important over time?
I think the opportunity of energy performance contracts in health is large. We have done 2 big EPCs, and indeed one of them at Peninsula Health is highlighted as a case study in your guide. So that was a $7 million EPC, with majority of it at Frankston Hospital, where we installed over 4,500 LEDs, a new high efficiency hot water system, HVAC upgrades, building controls, and solar. So there were some really good opportunities there. It's got a 5-year payback, and it reduced energy use by 23% and carbon by over 4,000 tonnes. So I would definitely like to see more EPCs. It's been very difficult at this time to engage with hospitals over the last 2 years, given they've been predominantly focused on COVID, and the engineers have been particularly busy with HVAC upgrades. But we have just done a $2.7 million extension to the EPC at West Gippsland, and there we're removing central steam, new energy infrastructure, solar, and LED. So a key theme I'm seeing coming out is where we can link energy efficiency and infrastructure upgrades. So the engineers love new, shiny, efficient equipment that works, and EPCs can help to actually provide that to them and reduce their risk profile, which they would otherwise have to support through either internal funding or through a competitive grants allocation by the department.
So one last question for you, Tin, and obviously I referred to the fact that you know, core service delivery is front and centre for hospitals, for all organisations, but hospitals it's mission critical, life and death stuff. You noted, you know, obviously, you know, when in the midst of a global pandemic, perhaps the focus has appropriately been elsewhere for the last couple of years, but also interested in unpacking what some of the other co-benefits are. Obviously, we're very interested in emissions reductions. We're very interested in strengthening budgets by saving taxpayer dollars, but I understand that one of the other things that you track and are aware of is some of the co-benefits of these sorts of energy performance improvements for that core service delivery and the experience of staff and patients within hospitals.
Yeah, so I think staff engagement is really important, and we are definitely seeing more of that and more expectations around what we do. And with a younger workforce, we know that a lot of the younger people do really see climate change as a key issue.
Yep.
And they want to work with employers who actually are doing something. So that is of course one. There's also probably more on the capital side as opposed to the upgrade side, is a lot of the energy efficiency initiatives you do can actually have climate adaptation benefits.
Yep.
So a high performing facade will allow a hospital to actually manage extreme temperatures much better. So that is something that's really important. And also, a more efficient building is going to reduce your heating and cooling load.
Yep.
So the average cost to build an acute hospital is around $15,000 per square metre. So the less area you can allocate to plant, the cheaper it will be to actually build the hospital and divert that funding to core business.
Yep.
There's also the bigger picture macro. So if we are using less fossil fuels to actually power hospitals, we're going to see better health improvements across the overall community. So there is that bigger picture macro level too, which also then comes down to things like EVs, where we can actually reduce tailpipe emissions.
All right, Tiernan. Well, thank you. You've explained some of the scope and the ambition, and also some of the achievements of your program within the Victorian hospital system incredibly well. I'll let you give yourself a rest. You can turn your camera off and your microphone, and I'll invite Lucy Haswell on for a little bit of a chat to round out our group of experts here. Of course, Lucy, you're coming from a slightly different perspective. You're Associate Director for Facilities and Operations at one of my favourite places, the National Gallery of Victoria, and you're responsible for overseeing the NGV International, the NGV Australia buildings, and led the implementation of the NGV Energy Performance Contract last year. Welcome, Lucy.
Thank you so much, Luke, and thank you so much for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure. And I think one of the great things about having these different perspectives from Parag and Sam and Tiernan and yourself is that, you know, there are a lot of different scales on which we need to think about these issues, and a lot of players that need to come together and work together to achieve these outcomes. And, you know, on the ground at a cultural institution with dare say some slightly different drivers to Tiernan and Parag and the sort of portfolios that they're managing, but also probably some similarities as well. I'm excited by the opportunity to unpack that. So perhaps, again, could we start with you just telling us a little bit about NGV and how you think about the task of kind of sustainability and energy performance in the context of that important institution?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Luke. So I feel like I'm probably here representing the coalface of government operations, definitely from the macro down to the micro in our situation. But I'm here from the National Gallery of Victoria, and we're Australia's oldest and most visited gallery. I should pop that in. So in non-COVID times, we see about 3 million people through our doors. So not an insubstantial number of visitors, and that ranks us in the top 20 international most visited museums. So that means that our buildings are always full and need to respond to our visitors' needs. So I look after facilities management, security and sustainability across our 2 existing facilities. So NGV International, for those who are familiar in Melbourne, is our 50-year-old heritage listed bluestone building on St Kilda Road, and for those interested in size of sort of 45,000 square metres we're talking. And NGV Australia is our 20-year-old and yet still newly heritage listed building at Federation Square in Melbourne. So that certainly adds its challenges as well when it comes to smart energy initiatives. I'm also lucky enough to be part of the project team that's doing the planning for NGV Contemporary, which is our new art and design gallery, which we built in the Melbourne Arts Precinct. So that's super exciting. And one of the things I've observed about being part of the planning for NGV Contemporary is how much easier it is to embed sustainability ambitions and goals and KPIs in a new build. And the extra challenge of retrofitting that in your existing facilities, but nonetheless up for the challenge.
Fantastic.
And I think, Luke, you talked about, well, what's different about a gallery, and we always say that our main visitor doesn't go home at night. The artwork stays in the building, and therefore, I mean, our buildings are very energy thirsty because we've got to maintain these very tight environmental controls around temperature and humidity for our artwork, and that's really I guess what's the sort of differentiator for us, but also is what drives us to do better and to make our facilities even more efficient.
Well, it was fascinating when you and Parag and Tiernan caught up for the pre-call last week, when we were talking about the different experiences across the different careers that you've had and the different sort of buildings and portfolios you manage. Actually, NGV has more in common with a hospital than it does with an office building, because of that load is a 24-hour load, and Tiernan's patients don't go home at night either, and neither do the artworks. And of course, you have really clear requirements for just maintaining the integrity of all of that globally important artwork, which is a way that I hadn't thought about it before, Lucy.
Thanks, Luke.
So you've done this energy performance contract. This is a relatively recent effort, I understand. What are some of the key things that you've managed to achieve by using the EPC model that Tiernan was just referencing?
Thank you. Well, I mean, greener government buildings has just been fantastic from an agency perspective, because it's access to an interest-free loan, and it's of the scale where you can actually make a difference in your buildings. So our energy performance contract was a $2.2 million project, a little bit of a different scale to my colleagues on the call, but nonetheless just as important. So we have achieved a 16% reduction in our energy usage, and I think that equates to sort of 2,500 tonnes of greenhouse gases, and Google tells me that's equivalent to taking 500 commuter cars off the road. So I feel like that's still a really commendable thing for us to be doing. We're in our second year of repayments, so we repay that loan through the savings from rolling out those initiatives. So in another 3 years we will really start seeing the reward financially as well, but really exciting to have that level of results already. We think anecdotally we are well beyond what's been guaranteed under the energy performance contract, but with the sort of COVID years we've had, it's a little bit harder to measure the impact and the performance. So we're really looking forward to coming out of that COVID environment and being able to see what the absolute benefits have been. And can I run through some of the things we've done?
I'd love to hear it.
Okay, great. Thanks. Look, some of them are really very similar to the other panel members and very stock standard when it comes to smart energy. And then we've done some other things that are perhaps a little bit more unique, and I can talk to those a little bit more. So we've done some of the standard stuff like put solar panels on our roof. We've got a very large building, so we have a very large roof. There's still plenty of room for more. So I might have a chat to Sam after this to see if there's room in the pipeline for me again, but we rolled out a whole range of really energy efficient mechanical solutions that similarly to tin, and my engineers got very excited about, and you know, we're really, really proud to be implementing them. Some of the things we did that were perhaps a little bit more unique, we rolled out a lot of LED lighting like everybody does, but one of the things we did was to replace the lighting above the Leonard French ceiling, which is, for anyone who hasn't seen it, it's an 800 square metre mosaic glass ceiling above the Great Hall in the NGV International. Absolutely beautiful artwork that is now glowing with the LED lights. So just the presentation of that artwork has just been transformed by that use of LED, which is just super exciting. A couple of the other things that we've done a little bit more unique to the gallery. One was rolling out iron air filtration. So we've taken out all of our old-fashioned carbon filters, and we now use the iron air filtration system. And this has meant that we've been able to halve our off-gassing time. And it sounds like a bit of a strange concept, but of course, each time we put in a new exhibition or a new collection display in the gallery, and we're repainting walls, and we're putting in new temporary walls, and essentially making a whole lot of mess and causing a whole lot of fumes in the room, and we can't have artwork in the room while we're doing that. So the time it takes for that air to settle and to be safe again for the artwork, we've gone from 3 days to 1.5 days, which means the team can be in and getting on with installing those beautiful artworks, like the Chanel exhibition that we've got running at the moment. Quick plug, which has been really a really awesome opportunity. And if you'll indulge me, just one more of which we are super proud, and that is that we implemented the infrastructure to be able to roll out a new international museum standard called BISO, Green Protocol. Bit of a fancy name for conservation standards that allow you to broaden the parameters in which you can store artwork. So it allows you to allow them to get a little bit cooler and a little bit warmer before you start either cooling or warming the air around them. These standards are being looked at internationally by all of the leading museums, and certainly people that we lend artworks to and that lend us artworks for exhibitions. And so we're now doing an international trial with the Getty Conservation Institute in Los Angeles, and trialling the effects of rolling out these standards. And it was the EPC project that allowed us to build that infrastructure to do the trial. And we literally have an international museum audience watching the trial and the results. And if you're here at the gallery, you can literally see it in action upstairs in one of our gallery spaces. So, you know, as well as those sort of standard energy efficient initiatives, we've really been able to do a few things that have been a little bit more leading edge and a little bit more innovative. And we've been able to leverage partnerships and international interest from that, which I think is, you know, really exciting.
Isn't that fabulous? And there's these standard kind of, we can think about it in terms of technologies and the, you know, whether it's the HVAC or the lighting, there are sort of some themes that run through all of these projects, but there's also like the particular situation that institutions and organisations find themselves in, and what they regard as core business, and how you can leverage, you know, an upgrade project, if I can call it that way, not just upgrade the energy performance, but to upgrade the performance of the business overall. What's the reaction been within NGV? I hear that, you know, there's obviously been some benefits which are meaningful for the staff in that institution.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, we've obviously got the environmental benefits, we've got the financial benefits, but when I was having a think about, you know, of what am I most proud for this project, I think it's actually the conversation that it's now driven, because the EPC was so visible. You could see the changes we were making. We talked about the changes we were making, and it really helped to facilitate more of a discussion around sustainability, not just in building operations, but across all of our core business, into programming and events and exhibition builds. And so we've got this lovely new focus, sort of organisational wide, on what we can do, and that, you know, coupled with the targets that we're all obligated to meet, and sort of starting a journey around carbon neutral road mapping, I feel like we're in a really strong position. And I think that the project and its scale and its visibility really helps that.
Fantastic. Look, you know, I'm delighted you're able to join us, and thanks for providing us with some of the detail around what the NGV has been doing and some of that lived experience, because we can talk at a whole of government level, we can talk at a portfolio level, but I think where it starts getting really exciting is when we get down onto the ground and hear what the benefits and the opportunities that are being captured within particular spaces, and that's what it's ultimately all about. So I might just pause there and invite our whole panel to turn their video on, turn their audio on. So we've got Parag and Tiernan. We've also got Sam lurking there in the background. Sam, if you want to join us as well, you've got a couple of shout outs and potentially some return customers who might be knocking on your door in 2022. So I guess you've got the heads up on that front. We've got some fantastic questions in the chat. So thank you all for shooting those questions through. Keep shooting them through as they're occurring to you in that Q&A tab. We'll work through as many as we can. There's a few sort of things that have been touched on over, in the course of your various presentations, which have come up in the Q&A, and and our audience is looking for a little bit more detail. One of them that came up is the impact of COVID, and particularly HVAC upgrades to deal with different requirements around ventilation. Obviously, there's heightened concern around that, and potentially competing imperatives in terms of increased ventilation, the availability of fresh air, and how we traditionally think about the efficient operation of the HVAC system. So I wonder, do any of our panelists have any commentary about how this is being balanced and where you see that conversation going over the coming period of time?
I'm happy to kick off on that one, Luke, given that most of my last 2 years has been working with our engineer on HVAC upgrades across our hospitals. So kind of transmission of COVID within hospitals is a very real issue. And there's a number of ways that we can manage that. One is with 100% outside air. One is with better filtration, so more HEPA filters, and they're kind of the infrastructure responses. And then you've got things like PPE, social distancing, and just your model of care. So how you treat COVID positive patients. There's even SCOVID, which is suspected COVID. So there's a whole new world of health acronyms. So 100% outside air is one that we are keen to progress with, because it does lead to less circulation, and we acknowledge that is fairly energy intensive. So a few things we've been looking at is actually how can we design the HVAC systems or redesign the HVAC systems so they're only in that pandemic mode in the areas they need to be at the time they need to be, so they can be turned on and turned off. It's easy to do in a new build. It's a bit harder in an older hospital. Something else we've been looking at is really doing a really deep clean of our air handling units to actually increase their efficiencies. We did that at a couple of hospitals at Western Health about a year ago, and we have seen about I think it was about a 1 year payback or less, and we're actually now working with a consultant to actually scope that up and do that across a much larger number of hospitals. So that's kind of one area where it is good for COVID, but it's also good for efficiency.
Thank you, Tiernan. Did anyone else want to chip in on that topic?
Yeah, sure. So we are getting a lot of requests for some months now from a workplace perspective.
Yep.
And because we are returning to work, like starting from January 10th, in sort of everybody's going to come back from Christmas, and there's instructions to get back to work for at least 2 days. So we have established a pilot program to check out like how COVID measures would impact utilities, but also do they really impact on outcomes on indoor environment quality. So a few things we are looking at, or we have sort of got approval, implementing a system in the lift, which does ionization, filtration, and of the air, and also UV system. And then on the flow where we are going to test these out, we are implementing IoT sensors to measure particulates, microbials, and other stuff. There's also going to be a before-after measurement done manually by a consultant of all these measures. And on the BMS side, we have implemented something called a COVID program. So if that's enabled, it provides 50% outside air, additional outside air, sorry.
Yep.
So we are also monitoring the occupancy, because after having like 6 months of discussions to establish the boundaries and parameters of the program, we realized that if there's no occupants, frankly, all these metrics are useless. But if there's also not, like if it's fully occupied, it's going to be a different outcome. So if we measure all those KPIs at full occupancy and they show improvement, that's good. If there's only 2 occupants, but we are assuming that it's full occupied building based on the design parameters, it's still not a good outcome.
Yeah.
So we are putting in live tracking of occupants as well, that we know there's say 25% occupancy or 100, and these metrics are normalized against those for energy, for your indoor environment metrics, and also the lift journeys. So that's sort of what we are looking at, and that will now has got approval and will kick off in January once we're back from holidays. But we are obviously keen to publish some of these results and share with everyone. And if it does work, then it will be rolled out across most of the sites in the portfolio.
We've got a specific follow-up for you, Parag, which is asking what monitoring technology you use to measure those results.
I'm not sure if I'm supposed to say brand names on the call, but it's sort of a similar technology. NewBio is the sensor technology that we're using, and we have rolled out say smart building IoT systems with them on 11 properties already. And it's giving us really good outcomes, and it's giving a 3-layer of information. It's the utility side information and efficiency performance. It's giving us occupant side information and also IQ information. And we are trying to now, we have set up a relationship with CSR and IRA under the BCH project. So first of all, we want to standardize all these different KPIs for industry. So it becomes like an Apple ecosystem where app developers can come in, just suck out the data, which is standardized without too much effort and hardware, and develop future apps. But also CSR will conduct research if there's linkage between IQ measures, energy measures, and occupancy, and how strong the correlations between these different measures are, which will inform future actions from people like us on if we do this X, then it gives better outcome on energy efficiency. If we do Y, it gives better outcome on IQ, or something gives outcomes on both.
All right. Well, we've hit up one of the hot topics of the last couple of years in COVID. Another one, obviously, is gas use. As our electricity system decarbonises, increasingly, grid supplied electricity, as well as the electricity that is generated on site, is lowering in its carbon intensity, which brings residual gas use on site into focus. And we have, a very reasonable question here. We've talked a little bit about electricity efficiency reductions. How are you thinking collectively? And, I'll leave it to you to put your hand up around that, around transitioning away from that gas resource over time.
Happy to kick off. I think in Victorian government hospitals are the largest gas users. So about 50% of our total terajoules is from gas. So just looking at the figures here, it's around 2,500 terajoules of gas per annum. But it's only 16% of our emissions at the moment. So come 2025, when we move to 100% renewable electricity, it will become our most material carbon emissions. The works we're doing, so working on a number of new big hospital business cases at the moment. So Parkville, Arden, Frankston, all of those are looking at all 100% electric hospitals. So there's a lot of work there. It's a lot easier to build an all-electric hospital as opposed to retrofit an existing hospital that has been using gas for 50 years. We are working with one metropolitan hospital at the moment who's got aging gas boilers, and we are looking at contributing some grant funding and some GGB loan funding to actually support an all-electric option there, which is a bit more expensive, but we're then also putting more solar in to actually help reduce the increased electricity. It is going to be a very long, slow road to move away from gas in our existing hospitals, but we are starting.
And with that increased expense, was that, I assume that was capital costs up front, but was that also operational costs?
It was operational. It was more expensive to run if we didn't put the solar in.
Right.
So it is a higher capital cost than a direct gas to gas, and we actually couldn't remove all the gas because that capex at the moment was just too much. One of the problems we do have is that electric equipment tends to be larger, so therefore it just technically sometimes can't fit into our boiler houses.
Yeah, and I suppose and we've been doing a bit of work on heat pumps in a range of different sectors and how they might be leveraged moving forward, and I suppose one of the areas is to just start doing some of these retrofits, Tin, and so we can start to unpack what the issues are and how they might be addressed, right? So to start that kind of learning and that innovation in terms of the actual application of the technology.
Yeah, definitely. We have to start somewhere. For all of our buildings under 10,000 square meters, we expect them to be all electric. That's in our sustainability guidelines. It's on a case-by-case basis for our larger acute hospitals, where the gas load or the thermal loads are particularly high.
Did anyone else want to comment on the topic of the role of gas as we sort of pursue these emissions reduction pathways?
I think NGV is not unusual in its gas usage, so it's really heating and appliances and generators. So we're certainly auditing what's currently fed through gas and looking at slowly transitioning, and so focused on the opportunities for a power purchase agreement to move us onto fully renewables in the event that we move from gas to electric. So all part of the journey, and always keen to hear others' experiences. And for us, it's as much negotiating with our neighbours who actually supply all of our electricity and have the gas boilers on site, which date back from about the 1960s. So it's going to be an interesting discussion with the Arts Centre next door.
Very good. All right. Well, we sort of, I think it's a relatively neat segue into one of the other questions that has been posed, which is around technology gaps. And I suppose, the learning curve around utilising heat pumps and that broader electrification is one technology gap, and the application that we're working on. Are there other sort of gaps that you're seeing? Other areas where there is need for either innovation or more experience through deployment? What are the big emerging areas that we're going to need to focus on for the two states, New South Wales, Victoria, a relatively sophisticated approach, but obviously a lot more to do over the coming decade.
You want I can jump in?
Yeah, I'd love you to jump in.
So I guess like one of the key things are measurement and verification, digitization, and remote systems.
Yep.
So unless you know what's happening, let's say on a 30-minute interval or daily interval time frame with all these assets, and you establish those learnings and 12 months outcomes, it's very hard to predict and justify what these technologies would do and which use cases they are appropriate for. So as say for Kieran and Lucy, they are running 24/7. So a lot of the technologies that are fit for purpose for them may not be for us, because we are running say 10 hours a day typically, and sometimes on weekends. But we have better options on load shedding. We have better opportunities for demand response. We have better opportunities to generate battery revenue streams. So that's sort of, I think that there should be adoption and dissipation of technology in terms of monitoring collection of data and analytics, but also things like thinking long term. So when you're thinking for solar, as I said, you need to think of integrating batteries sometime down the line, and then also integrating your electric vehicles. So just as an example, we just did a review of one of our sites, which has 100 car park spaces. New South Wales government has also released an ambitious policy of 50% EV on the fleet by 2026 and 100% EVs on the entire fleet by 2030, which is a big ambition. So we have done some data crunching. There's 12,000 fleet vehicles across the state fleet, of which about 4,000 to 5,000 will be parked in our office buildings. If you take a building, which is 100 car spaces, so we can put, say, as you know, on an office building, we can typically put in 100 kilowatt solar because there's not enough roof space. Then we are putting in, say, 100 to 200 kilowatt battery because we're doing some tariff arbitrage and wholesale trading. But if you think of 100 vehicles with batteries, which are generally 100 kilowatt hour, that's a phenomenal amount of load available, which you can literally charge, and you can run the building possibly on those cars full time for 2-3 days if they're just parked on site. So those sort of thought processes, that is a 5-10 year plan, needs to be integrated in the strategy, and also thinking of what comes in the future rather than what's available now, can deliver and expedite our emissions reductions. The other thing I think there's a gap is we're talking to a very close partner of ours on live carbon tracking. So like we track our electricity, gas, water, etc. on interval data meters, we would love to have an overlay of live carbon wholesale market tracking. So we can make informed decisions. So as you know, in the middle of the day, the grid is 100% clean if you track live, because there's excess solar and wind. So if we can shift our entire load for those 6 hours, during those times will be 100% renewable, and we won't have any emissions. Mm-hmm. And with that as well, we don't buy any offsets and lots of other revenue benefits as well. So that's where I see the market going, and there's some work to be done towards that live bi-directional trading market sort of concept, and generating revenue from sustainability rather than just investing cost, which is a paradigm shift. So people don't see this as a cost hole; they rather see this as an opportunity for the future.
And the only thing I'd add to that, Parag, which I think is a fantastic point around that, the flexibility piece and the load shaping piece and how important that's going to be over the next decade and beyond, is that for organisations like yours that they've almost done the basics. They've gone and started to understand the what's going on across their portfolio. They have a more nuanced understanding of the various loads in different buildings and facilities across the system. It kind of creates a foundation. Okay, we've got the basics under control, and then you can start to do some of this more innovative stuff, or contemplate some of this more innovative stuff. Upgrade the data and the control that you need to engage in those markets. So there's almost like a food pyramid of areas that you can work through, and that with that load flexibility sort of up towards the top, once you've got that foundation of good data, good management of energy efficiency and energy performance, bringing in the renewables, and then some of the flexibility stuff can kind of drive you to the next level. Is that fair?
Yes. And the hard work, doing all the hard work up front, like the fundamentals, the base case issues, identifying your baseline, setting up these systems and processing your business, is what is critical to then being able to avail these future opportunities. Yep. And say in our own experience, let's say the 5 years past, the first 2 years have been substantial effort. So time invested. We have an in-house team of experts. So we do our neighbors ratings in-house, because it's not just about neighbors rating, but we understand the portfolio and assets better, and we know exactly what to plug in at the right time. But first 2 years was a lot of effort. As I said, we just didn't even know how much electricity spend we have. The results and the savings have been started to show since year 3 to year 5. So setting the fundamentals right now, to even avail these demand response or say BPP technologies, we have a substantial amount of data and technology that has been built into our portfolio. So we can dispatch and calculate those outcomes pretty quick. Whereas if we didn't even have smart meters that are 5-minute interval enabled, which is a very basic thing like anybody can do, we cannot participate in those markets.
All right. Well, we've got a question here, and Sam, you've been let off pretty lightly, so I might pose this one to you because it's kind of in your wheelhouse. It's going to how important government policy is in driving these outcomes. there is an awful lot being achieved in New South Wales and Victoria. They've got that sort of whole of government framework and a lot of activity engagement, sort of the departmental level. But I'm also aware that one of the things you've said is that, you know, with all of the water under the bridge with the Greener Government Buildings program, it's actually not that difficult now because there's an understanding of the program and the opportunity to get departments engaged. I mean, we heard from Lucy how enthusiastic the NGV has been to engage. It's not, I don't get the sense that you were sitting outside her door kind of sort of making her do anything. It was almost the other way around. So, you know, can you talk to me about that sort of journey and the role of mandates, you know, to get things going, but, you know, how that sort of engagement shifts over time?
Yeah, sure, Luke. And I've typed an answer in there. I wasn't familiar with your process here, so I wasn't aware that I was supposed to wait and give you the answer verbally. But so yeah, I mean, government policy is pretty important. If you didn't have government policy, as I typed in there, I think you'd have a few people that would still go and do everything they could. You'd have Lucy and you'd have Tiernan and you'd have Prag, and they would probably drive it because they're passionate and good at what they do. But you'd have the majority that probably wouldn't do anything, and there'd be a lot of parts of government that won't respond unless there's a government policy and a requirement for it. And there's good reason for that. You know, within their organisations, they might have limited resources. There's, you know, taxpayers don't want to have lots and lots of public servants just sitting there doing nothing. So we have to be efficient with our staff. So there needs to be government policy, otherwise things probably won't get done at scale. We found when we started the GGB program in 2009, we put a mandate and we put targets upon every department and a requirement to for all those departments to identify projects to meet a certain proportion of their total portfolio's greenhouse gas emissions by a certain time. And that was a good way to start things up initially. Over time, we've had some issues over the years in terms of funding, and we went back to a sort of an annual funding amount, which limited things significantly and kind of meant that we focused on the people that were ready and willing to do it, like Tiernan and Lucy. But yeah, now that we do have a broader funding base, we have an ongoing revolving fund, and we've got about $20 million a year that we want to push out into energy efficiency, renewable upgrades of government buildings. We're now pushing departments to get us their future pipelines of projects. And that's very useful thing. So it's not just policy, but also having the funding base to be able to provide a bit of confidence to the market, so that there's providers on the line here listening to this. We've got a lot of confidence now that we're going to roll out $20 million worth of projects every year for the next 5 to 10 years and ongoing, hopefully. So it's hopefully enough for those suppliers to consider investing and really focusing on providing those services to us. We have a good little base of providers at the moment, but we're always looking to grow that base with more providers. Back to the previous question, more technologies too. We know a lot about solar and lighting. Project after project's going out at the moment. Solar and lighting is just getting a little bit boring. So I'd love to hear about some new technologies. What else is out there that can meet our somewhat limiting payback period of 5 years? Please let us know what's coming up. We won't specify, typically with an EPC, we won't specify what technologies we want. We'll just specify the payback period. Maybe other projects we at times do specify solar or lighting because we kind of know that there's not really anything else. But yeah, suppliers out there listening today, please let us all know what's coming up, what's interesting.
All right, well, we're almost out of time, and we had a closing question which I want to pose to each of you, and if you could maybe just short, sharp answers. But I'll start with you, Sam. For other jurisdictions that are considering establishing one of these programs, what is the one thing you encourage them to think about as they're starting on this journey?
Look, I think that the thing that we've seen with other jurisdictions is that, and some of them have done it really well, and New South Wales has had their program around for a while. I'd probably only say for New South Wales, Government Resource Efficiency Program is a rather boring title for a program. Take 4 of the most boring words in the dictionary and put them together. But apart from that, it's brilliant. But we do some things that are very similar, and so a lot of these things are the same. You don't need to provide grant funding for energy efficiency projects generally, and it's harder to ask for grant funding than it is to ask for loans. So setting up a program with loans for energy efficiency programs is the way to do it. it's not going to impact the state's or the government's net debt position, and that's the limiting factor that worries governments. If you're asking for grant funding, it's competing against new hospitals and schools and police officers and everything else. If you're asking for loan funding, it's a lot easier. You just have to have a way of giving confidence that you'll be able to pay it back. And so that element of giving confidence to it, you need to have a program that's set up to make sure that you're measuring and verifying the savings appropriately. We use energy performance contracts, but we also use other forms of procurement and contracting that don't require as much measurement and verification. But you've got to have a system where you and generally, I'd say you probably want to have some commercial and technical expertise in a central department to provide that advice. But you need to have a process where you're developing a project, you have the funding source available in the form of a loan. There's going to be assistance for the agency in terms of how they procure, contract, and then measure and verify the outcomes, so they have confidence that they can repay that loan. They're the key things to do, really. So Victoria's done it, New South Wales has done it, Queensland did it, but then they got rolled over by a former government a few years ago. It's not rocket science. I think we've all, both New South Wales and Victoria, shown that this is an effective way of doing it. And I think if there's any other governments, jurisdictions listening in, we'd be happy, sure, Parag as well, and myself and Tiernan and Lucy to have a chat and talk about how to set up these sorts of things in a way that's worked for us.
Well, for those listening along at home, if you're wondering what's in that best practice guide, Sam's just given the 3-minute overview of the program of best practice that we've laid out there. So thank you for that, Sam.
There's a nice picture of a tree in there as well, I think, Luke.
Yeah, just keep an eye out for the tree. That was one of Sam's key pieces of feedback. Tiernan, anything to add to what Sam's just said?
From the hospital side or the agency portfolio side, I think two key things is one is good data. You have to have good data, so you need to know which hospital or which agency or which site to invest in.
Yep.
I think that's pretty key. And don't underestimate the need for boots on the ground. The Frankston EPC, Peninsula Health EPC, was so successful because Peninsula Health basically funded one of their own engineers to work full-time as the interface between the ESCO and the hospital and the department. So I think that is really key, and that's, I think, from my perspective, that is the biggest barrier I have, is that I've probably got a good 20 hospitals out there that want to do EPCs, but I've only got 2 people. So actually having time to actually get out there and actually manage it with everything else that I need to do is hard. So having the framework is great, but you need to have the resources to actually implement it.
Yeah, great advice. Parag, anything else?
Yeah, I would like to say that policy and framework is very important, because for government, at least, it gives you a backing to drive the change. But from my personal experience, like even before we get to the funding, which is the cash C, I would say that there's 4 key C's that are more important before you start investing money. And that's commitment. So you need to have genuine business or government commitment, which means something. You need to have clarity. So the policy or the strategy or commitments need to be very clear and succinct, that everybody understands what it means. Then there are champions. So people who actually are passionate and have the right skills. And as Ian said, I am a believer on boots on the ground. So not somebody who sits in an office and just comes up with ideas, but who understands the whole gamut from ideas to delivery.
Yep.
And the last one is collaboration. So I guess all of us in government collaborate with government, private sector, contractors, service providers, university, everybody. So that, and industry bodies, I shouldn't forget industry bodies like ECC, GBCA, and neighbors, who have combined helpless, and we reach out to them frequently for support and ideas. And that sort of nexus of those 4 C's is the primary thing that needs to be focused on first. And once you set that up well, then you'll get cash. And that's my personal experience in government as well. Once we had that, we had a clear idea and we put forward really good business cases. The cash started coming in and it has built over the years. And we have been able to deliver some outstanding outcomes. Thanks.
Fantastic, Parag. And Lucy, any thoughts to bring us home?
Gosh, to follow Parag's 4 Cs, I guess I would just say, we work hard for these projects. We work hard to establish them. There's a lot of work to implement them. There's a lot of work to track the performance. And I say, celebrate, showcase, tell people, just keep promoting what you're doing, because you'll find more and more people interested, more and more people getting behind similar initiatives. And you just sort of build that groundswell for really demonstrating what you can do through these projects.
Hey, thank you, Lucy. That's a perfect note to end on. I want to thank our whole panel, Parag, Lucy, Sam and Tin. And we've been very lucky to have your expertise on hand for the launch of this best practice guide. And a lot of your insights are reflected in that guide. And so again, I commend it to everybody listening in if you're wanting to progress down this pathway. So thank you to all of you. I do have some other thank yous to make to round out this session. So you can all relax now. You can turn off your video. Your bit's done. I'm just going to run through a thank you also to the Victorian Assistant Treasurer, Danny Pearson, for obviously helping us launch the guide today. And the Australian Sustainable Built Environment Council, particularly Frankie Muscovich, Tim Wheeler, Sandra Chan, Katie Dean and Elson Scotland. This was very much a joint effort and another example of the incredible collaboration we see across the sustainable built environment sector, of which we're all very proud. We also had some outstanding contributions from a whole range of EEC and PCA and GBCA and ASBEC members, but particularly the team at net zero advisory firm EcoSave. They put a lot of hours into this project, went above and beyond, because they believe in the idea of getting this market going and governments benefiting from it, and particularly Robin Archibald and Marco de Gouvier. We really appreciate all the time you put in, the entire Energy Efficiency Council Commercial Buildings Task Group, and really importantly, the Department of Treasury and Finance and DPI, particularly Sam Burke, who you've had the benefit of his expertise over the last 90 minutes, but also Peter Fan, and at DPI in New South Wales, Nav Bra, spent a lot of time with this document, making sure that we were capturing those insights. And so we're incredibly appreciative of the time and effort that those government departments have put in. And I think that we've all heard the appetite for governments that are a little bit further along in the journey to share those insights with their colleagues and peers right around the country. So I guess we encourage you to make the most of that opportunity. If you haven't already done so, what are you doing? Please download this guide and share it in your networks. We appreciate your support in getting it out far and wide. We want it to be as impactful as possible. A lot of people put a lot of time and work into this. eec.org.au/government-operations is the link. I've also been asked to alert you that there's another broader guide that we produced a couple of years ago under our Navigating a Dynamic Energy Landscape banner, a guide for government agencies, which is less focused on the whole of government programmatic approach and more focused on some of the opportunities that departments to do things themselves. So it's coming at it from a slightly different angle, and it's got lots of case studies, lots of inspiration in there, but I think they're very complementary works. And if you want to take a look at that, you'll find that at energybriefing.org.au. That's pretty much it from us. Have a fantastic summer break. Bring along the Smart Energy Management for government operations for your beach reading. We look forward to seeing you in the new year, but in the meantime, on behalf of Property Council, the Green Building Council, the Australian Sustainable Built Environment Council, and of course the Energy Efficiency Council, it's goodbye from us, and we'll catch you soon.